Welcome to another episode of our podcast, where we bring you the stories and experiences of accomplished legal professionals from around the world. Today, we are honored to have with us Manu Thadikkaran, a distinguished international disputes lawyer. Sir is currently a senior associate at A&O Shearman in Dubai, focusing on construction arbitration. His impressive career includes time at White & Case LLP in Paris. He's also an accomplished scholar, having earned his LLM at MIDS Geneva, supported by the prestigious Hans Wilsdorf Scholarship, and his BA LLB honors from National University. With extensive experience in construction and investment arbitration, as well as numerous published works in international journals, Manu Sir brings invaluable insights into the intricacies of dispute resolution and evolving landscape of international arbitration. In this episode, we'll dive into his journey, the challenges of working across multiple jurisdictions, and his advice for aspiring international arbitration lawyers. Let's welcome Manu Sir to the show. Hello and welcome, sir, to Brief Encounters. It's an honor having you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much. So now this is a question that we ask all our guests. What sparked your interest in law and what factors influenced your decision to pursue it as a career?
Right. So for me, again, law was not, it wasn't that when I was in school, I thought, okay, I wanted to study law or I wanted to be a lawyer because there was no lawyer in my family. I actually wanted, all I knew was, I didn't want to do science, I didn't want to do commerce, and I thought economics was what I wanted to do. And then I came across these 5-year LLB programs, which my father brought to my attention, actually. And when I read about them, I thought, I can give it a try. Again, not fully realizing what it entailed. But once I started law school, before starting law school, I was in 2 minds. But once I started law school, I realized that this is what I want to do. The logical reasoning that you apply, the way in which you approach a problem, and in due course, as I understand, the training you get and how to think overall, I thought, I can't pinpoint a particular factor that piqued my interest. But yes, once I started studying law, once I got introduced to that topic, once I got introduced to that world, I just stuck to it because, I liked what I heard, I was interested in it. And, at some level, I thought, I realized that this is what I wanted to do. And at the end of the day, you really need to do what you are interested in or what you like. And that's where, I guess, law came in from in the end.
Right. So we can say it was quite an organic journey for you, where you slowly realized that this was the path you wanted to take.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was not pre-planned, so to say.
I think that's much better than something that's pre-planned. Like, it surprises you in being the best thing in your life. That's beautiful. So you did your LLB from NLU Jodhpur. What led you to choose NLU Jodhpur for your legal education?
Right. So again, NLU Jodhpur was a great university. I had actually spent 1 year in NUALS, which is in Kochi before that. Again, at that time, there was the CLAT wasn't there. And me and my family thought it's better to stay closer to home. So I had only looked at universities in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and then Cochin. I did spend a year in Cochin, and that's when they had announced CLAT. And I thought, I honestly don't remember why exactly I decided to get CLAT again. It's just, I was there. I was happy in NUALS, but, there was CLAT, so I thought, why not give it a try? And I did get into Jodhpur, and Jodhpur had its reputation for sure, an excellent reputation. And even, people within NUALS told me when they got to know that I got into Jodhpur that you should really go. And, at the time, of course, I didn't realize what that entailed, but in hindsight, I'm very happy that I did because of the way in which it opened up my opportunities, especially to pursue a career in international law. And that was one thing I did notice Jodhpur had, was they had the specialization after your 3rd year, which many law schools did not have. And while I did not know what exactly I wanted to specialize in, I did like the fact that you had that option to specialize even within your undergraduate studies.
Right. So usually when people are in their undergrad, they have a confusion between performing and participating in extracurricular activities, being part of committees. So from your journey, I've noticed that you were part of the Moot Court Committee as well as IJAL. Moot Court Committee is quite personal to me as well. I joined it this year and it's been a great experience so far. So for the listeners who are listening to this podcast, could you provide how important was your involvement in these committees like MCC and IJAL to your journey in general towards international arbitration?
Absolutely. So again, when I joined law school, like it was new for me. All of the good thing was I did spend a year in renewal, so I knew what mooting was. In fact, there was one internal moot that I had already participated before I joined Jodhpur. But so the very first time I had no idea what it was. I obviously did not do well at it because I did not know what I was doing, but I really enjoyed that experience. And then when I joined Jodhpur and when I heard there was a call for the moot court committee, again, I don't think I applied to any other committee at the time because nothing really sparked my interest, I have to say at that point. But when I heard there was a moot court committee, I remembered what I did, and the rest is, as I say, history because I spent 5 years. I mean, I was there in the committee for 5 years, from first year until fifth year. But yeah, and I thought that was a very good way to, because if you have an interest in mooting as a junior, I think it's a great thing to be there because you get to interact with all these people, see what they do. But again, of course, this varies depending on which law school you're in, as I understand. But at least in Jodhpur, being in the moot court committee did not just mean you're going to moot or you're going to be a good mooter. It's also you have to be a good organizer. And again, that was something I liked. You had to organize the internal moot courts. You had to organize the MMSingvi or the antitrust law moot courts at the time. And I really enjoyed doing all that for some reason, it was, and of course, I'm not saying I did it alone. I was part of a team that did it, but I really enjoyed doing that. And, progressively, you know what to do. Like your first year, you don't know what to do. Second year, you know a bit more on what to do. And it was like a progressive step for me. And I liked it every step of the way. And I think it really increased that skill of mine to actually organize something so much so that I continued doing that even afterwards. When I was in White and Case in Paris, I was part of organizing the WISP remote for the firm, for the office. And again, I could draw upon what I did or did well and did not do well back in school or in the moot court committee. So yeah, from that perspective, I think moot court committee was great. Plus, it's something that shows you are doing something towards something that you're interested in. And I'm sure we'll come to this later, but at some point when you're doing your LLM applications, these are things you can show. It's not about saying you were part of the moot court committee. Rather, it's you were interested in mooting, and this is what you did to pursue that interest. So that was more of it. And the same with IJAL. Once I decided I wanted to do arbitration, it's great to be part of a journal, and a reputed journal that too, because it was listed in Kluwer. To be part of that, it really shows that you're not just saying you have an interest in arbitration, you're actually doing things to show that you have an interest in the subject. So yes, those extracurriculars, at least from my perspective, were great. And the only thing I would say there is you have to be careful in which extracurriculars you choose, because for me at least the point was I need to do something that I like, that I'm interested in. So, if I wasn't particularly interested in constitutional law, so it wouldn't have made sense for me to be part of a journal on constitutional law for that matter, however prestigious it may be. So that's my point. When you're picking your extracurriculars, I think you should do it out of interest, not just something you can put in your CV, because at the end of the day, and we'll come to that later, I'm sure, is your CV needs to tell your story. And your story can't be in 5 different places.
That is very true. So I may ask a slight question here. Given your journey at NUALS, you realized that mooting, organizing moots, that was something that you were interested in. And IJAL you joined because of your interest in arbitration. If I may ask, what about students who are not able to understand what their interests are, even in the first or their second year? How should they choose and pick their extracurriculars so as to curate their CV in order to show their story? Would dabbling in different committees and figuring out what your interests are the right way to go? Or should you still stick to one particular thing and consistently stay in it and hope to build an interest in it later?
No, that's why you have 5 years, right? That's a good thing. Again, I got that head start because of NUALS. But yeah, in NUALS, I had no idea what I was doing. I tried out mooting, I tried out something else. There was extemporary debate, as I remember. There were MUNs. So, of course, in your initial years, you try it out. That's a good thing about a 5-year course. You have 5 whole years. So it's not that, there's also not so much. It's not fair to expect anyone to know what they really want to do in your first year. There may be exceptions, but as a general rule, and certainly for me in your first year, even in Jodhpur, I knew that, okay, first of all, I didn't have any interest in arbitration. I didn't even know what arbitration was in my first year. I wanted to do intellectual property rights, which then turned into trade law. which then turned into arbitration. So, that happened over time. But at least when you have an interest in something, you need to test it out for sure. Now, what I would suggest is do that in your initial years. Don't try to do that in your, let's say, fourth year or fifth year. That shows a lack of focus. But your first and second year, absolutely, that's the time you can experiment and you can figure out. And you don't have to be married to what you thought you liked in your first year. Like I said, I liked intellectual property rights in my first year, or I thought I liked to study it, but the concepts. I'm doing nothing related to IPR right now. So, that's absolutely fine.
That's really good. I think that would be quite settling for a few of the students as well. So besides extracurricular activities, looking back at your time in law school and then your LLM application process, how significant do you think academic performance in terms of grades specifically, how important are they throughout the 5 years?
So there are many schools of thought on this. I personally think that academic performance is important, but I don't think it's the most important thing in the journey there may be places where it's important. I can't pinpoint examples, but I'm sure there are, even for LLMs. Again, I'm not saying it's not important at all. I need to make that very clear. It is important. But is it the most important thing? I don't think so. Because if you're pursuing an LLM or, if you're pursuing a specialized LLM, in my experience, what really matters is how do you show that genuine interest in that specialized area or field? That does not come just from academic performance. I think that comes from a more holistic view of things. Now, that said, there are some LLMs. For example, if I recall correctly, Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard, they have a cutoff or sort of a cutoff based on what your ranking or position is in the batch. I don't know if this is still true. I don't know if this was true back then. This is something I had heard back then. But I wouldn't be surprised that there is a basic gateway aspect to it where, if your academic performance is below a level or, if it's not in the top 5 percentile or 10 percentile, then you may not be considered. But again, that's one set of, those are from my understanding there for these general LLMs. The minute you're talking about a specialized LLM, I don't think that's what at least all the places that I had looked at, that was not the criteria because I was not on the top of my class for sure. I didn't do bad, but I was not on the top of my class. And that's because I had a lot of other things to show as to what I did.
Right. So I think there should be like a good balance between extracurriculars and
There should be.
Just like
Yeah.
a holistic.
And again, to each his own, right? Some people, prefer to have that. I had a lot of friends who are doing excellent, very well right now, either in practice or abroad, who did great in their academic. And, it shows your skill for sure, or a part of your skill set. And, there are some people who are happy to do it, who like to do it. And, kudos to them. I think that's a great thing. But just because I don't think that's the only way to go about things, just because, especially for these specialized areas of law, if you have a focus on something, then, I would approach it in a more holistic manner, keeping in mind that grades are, of course, important, but probably not the most important thing.
Makes sense. And like you had mentioned, the honor specialization is something that is quite great. So what drew you towards international trade and investment law? Was it your internships or was it something else that drew you to it?
Yeah, so like I said, initially I wanted to do IPR. And that's how I made a segue into trade because trade and IPR were related. To be honest, I don't recall exactly what piqued my interest in international trade because now I'm no longer doing that. It's been a while, probably 15 years since that happened. But I believe it's because of the subject. So we had Yogesh Pai, who was a professor back then who taught us trade law. And I really enjoyed that class and I really enjoyed the concepts. And then I managed to do an internship in South Center, which is an NGO in Geneva. And all in all, I liked the whole concept. So first of all, that was my foray into international law. So I realized that, okay, international law is the area where I probably want to end up. And then within that, I thought trade law was an interesting concept. And, at the time, I wrote a paper on a Paris Convention and the TRIPS Agreement, which, again, I wrote it so long ago. So when I sometimes have to read it again now to understand what exactly was that discussion or debate, because it is a whole different set of law or a whole different body of law that you can do. But when I did write that paper, I really delved into the issues. I had discussions. And when you do something like that, you realize this is something. And that's how I realized I didn't like company law. I tried to read or, because there was a time when I thought, okay, company law might be interesting. You can go to a law firm and work on a corporate law matters. But I tried reading, and I don't want to say, I was reading it all the time. That's not something I did, but I really wanted to read it and see if this is something I liked, and I never got into that. But there are some things where when you start your research and you're trying to write a paper, you just get interested in it. And that was, I guess, what trade law was for me, if I recall correctly. And again, of all the specializations that were given, the only real choices for me was IPR or trade, because I already knew I would like to, be in that realm of international law by then. And within that, I thought, trade was the better option that I liked at the time.
Right. And so during your undergrad studies, you interned with top-tier firms like Amarchand and AZB. How did these experiences influence your journey? And do you think internship experience influences someone's journey in law school and beyond?
I think so. So again, AZB, I was in my second or third year, as I recall, and I worked in the capital markets team. Again, that was the time when I was still giving corporate law a shot. Amarchand, I have to say, did contribute to my interest in arbitration, because I did 2 internships, both in the arbitration team led by Mr. Sikku Mukhopadhyay at the time. This was before he left the firm to become a senior counsel. So for me, it was a mix of things. I did the WIS moot at the same time, and I did these internships at the same time. And, those things came together, and that's when I completely turned to arbitration, because that's when I realized. But yes, that practical experience I got working in the arbitration team in Amritsar really did make a difference in terms of helping me decide that this is the path I want to take.
Wow, I think your undergrad journey was quite interesting. In a way, you curated your path towards arbitration while also delving into other interests. I think that's something that people should take into consideration when they're moving forward. Now, considering the name of this project, let's go on to the LLM application.
Absolutely.
When did you decide to pursue a master's degree abroad, and what exactly guided your decision?
So, when I decided I wanted to do arbitration, I realized that I need to do it. Now, the question was, do I do an LLM right away, or do I do it, work for 2 years? Because that is, there is a financial aspect involved in all of this. So I guess my plan A was actually to work and then go for an LLM, just because it costs a lot, and I didn't want to have that money taken as a burden either on my family or myself at the time. And again, it wasn't that I really thought through it, but for better or for worse, my plans to do that did not work as I thought it would. And that's when I thought, there's no harm in applying for LLMs. I did apply to a lot of places, in the sense that I think for many US universities, you need the LSAC account. So I just eliminated all those, because I was like, I'm not going to do all that. I did know I wanted to do arbitration. So I actually read upon it. What are the programs that, because there was no guidance at the time. Arbitration was there to start, but I don't think there was any real guidance as to what are the universities outside India you can look into and things like that. So I read upon it. And that time, the MIDS LLM had only been 5 years old or something. But I looked at it. It had excellent faculty. The course structure made sense, and it was Geneva. I had been to Geneva once. I really liked the location. So, that obviously was one of the places. And, it was free to apply. I don't know if it still is, but at least at the time, the application was free. So I thought, what are you going to lose? So I did that. Then, of course, I had narrowed down to Stockholm University, Queen Mary University, and the University of Miami, because I heard that they had a decent arbitration LLM. But yeah.
Right. So, like you've mentioned, while shortlisting universities, you focused on your own research. Arbitration is what drove your consideration of picking universities. But besides your own research, did you reach out to alumni or professionals or other professors to gain insights into the subject?
Right. So when I decided that MIDS is the place I want to apply, I did reach out to some MIDS alumni. With some of them, I'm very good friends with right now. But yes, there was a lot of guidance, thankfully. In particular, there was this student, Rukmini Das from NUJ. She did the MIDS 1 year before me. She's now a lecturer at the MIDS. But, I had a great chat with her. She explained to me what that course was, what she was doing, and it really put some focus on how I wanted to approach the application process. Other than that, there was a lot of support from my peers, from my classmates itself, because a lot of people were applying for LLMs. But not a lot, but a few people were applying for LLMs. And we would always discuss, and for me, that was a great source of information, because there were some people who had a lot more clarity than I did on how to approach applications, and they were more than happy to share that. Of course, we all had different interests. We were applying to different universities, sometimes to the same university, but generally that did help. I always had my friends read my SOPs just because, I'd like to have a fresh perspective on that. So yeah, I guess those were the main things that I did. I don't think I did reach out to the arbitration professor at the time, and he also had good things to say about the universities, but that was all after I shortlisted the universities, not before. I guess the shortlisting happened on my own, and after that I reached out to alumni, professors, and my own classmates on the support that they could give me, which I'm truly thankful for.
Right. So what was your final university shortlist like, and which ones were you conflicted in after receiving the admission offers? How did you finally choose MIDS?
Right. So in the end, I think I did apply to Oxford, Cambridge. I did not get into those for better or for worse. But in the end, I think the universities that I actually really focused on were MIDS, then University of Stockholm, and like I said, Queen Mary, and University of Miami. Now, I did get into all four of these institutions, but for me, the biggest consideration was scholarship. Again, like I said, my plan was to work and then go. So I applied fully knowing that without a scholarship, I'm not going to go for an LLM. It just was not going to happen. Now, University of Miami gave a partial scholarship, which meant only half your tuition fee was covered. Queen Mary did not offer any scholarship. The two places I got a full scholarship from was MIDS and the University of Stockholm. Again, University of Stockholm, it's actually a Swedish government scholarship that I applied to do, and they give an X number of scholarships to do for students to pursue masters in Sweden. So it wasn't a university thing, but a government thing. But the MIDS thing was a university-based scholarship. So when I got these two, then essentially the decision came down to those two universities. And of those, I picked A because, well, the scholarship amounts and everything was similar. Your living expenses and your tuition fee would be taken care of. So you really don't end up spending anything. In fact, probably the Stockholm one was slightly better than the MIDS in terms of the amount that you would get at the end of the day, or the benefits like flights and things like that you get at the end of the day. But I think I went for MIDS, well, a few factors. First factor was, I knew I wanted to do arbitration, but there was still some lingering feelings towards trade law. And when I saw the MIDS program, it is a more holistic, it's a master's in international dispute settlement. So you were going to touch upon all, there was a focus on arbitration, but there was also, focus on trade and public international law. So I thought, it still gives me that space to still explore these areas of interest of mine and, do it in a location that is, let's say, the birthplace of trade law, so to say, not the birthplace, but the hub of trade law, so to say. So, that's what, and then I thought the course structure and the faculty at MIDS offered a lot more opportunities to network, and its proximity to other hubs of arbitration, such as Paris and London. And again, like I said, I've been to Geneva. I really like the location also. There's a personal preference as well that not just, it was probably, I don't know if it was well thought of because I'd never been to Sweden, but I had been to Geneva and I thought, okay, I've been to Geneva. I know the place. I like the place. And I even had a close relative there nearby who lived. So all these factors, came in. But yeah, the main factor was I really liked the course structure, and I realized that it would still allow me to explore trade law if I wanted to and whereas the Stockholm one was very much focused on arbitration law.
Right.
And the last thing is, I've always heard Sweden is a lot colder than Geneva or Switzerland. So that also plays a small part in the decision.
It is. So you had mentioned doing the master's immediately after undergrad or having some work experience. One of the major factors was obviously the cost. However, looking back, do you think this was the right choice? Or if you could go back, would you still have some work experience and then go for the master's?
It was definitely the right choice for me. But whether it's the right choice objectively, that really depends. Because, well, the first thing is, what do you want to do after your LLM? And that's something I always ask people who approach me to think. I didn't think of it. And, things turned out good for me, but, a lot of that was a lot of being at the right place at the right time and things like that. But in hindsight, one thing, there was something I would change. I never thought of what to do after I knew I wanted to work, but that was it. The general vague idea that I wanted to work. What I would suggest people to do is think a little bit more about what you want to do after your LLM. You want to work in an international law firm. You want to work in an international organization. You want to work in an arbitral institution. You want to come back to India and practice. You want to come back to India and work in a law firm. You want to come back to India and work in an arbitral institution. All these factors make a difference. Now, if your plan is to work abroad in a law firm or in one of these IOs, then I would think the sooner the better that you go for your LLM, because every year the market is getting more and more competitive. People go through many internship cycles. And again, when I say internship cycles, these are 6 months, 3 or 6 months internship cycles before they land a job. And even then, there's no guarantee that they will land a job, but you need that time. What I've seen sometimes is if you work, let's say 4 years in a law firm as an associate, and then you come to your LLM, sometimes it's a little difficult for people to then take the internship route. And understandably so, because you worked as an associate for 4 years, and then having to go back to being an intern is not ideal. So yeah, if that is your point, and that's where I was really blessed, I thought, because in fact, I wanted to do an internship. I didn't even try for a direct associate position in any of them because I had no work experience. And for me, it was a great experience, I think, because I actually learned on the job during my internships. My first internship helped me in my second internship, which then got me my job. So for me, it was perfect. So, and the reason it didn't really bother me at all was I had no experience. That was the logical route for me. But if that is something you're not willing to do after 4 years of working as an associate in India, then probably you might want to think of doing the LLM sooner rather than later. Now, if you want to go back to India and work, or if you want to work in the field of arbitration in India or in this region, then of course it helps to have that experience. Like right now, if I want to go back to India, might not be that easy because I know arbitration, but I don't know a lot, or I have not worked in the field of Indian arbitration per se. I've not gone to courts a lot and done things, arbitration related. And the other thing is contacts. When you work in India, you do make contacts. So that also makes it always easy to come back. Not to say that you don't make contacts otherwise, but it's just, you already worked in an Indian law firm, you know people, and, they might be in different places by the time you come back. So definitely from that perspective, if your plan is to come back to India, then I would think, yes, working and then going is definitely the better option. And finally, it's the finances. And that's something everyone has to decide for themselves. So, I guess the point I want to underline there is, like I said, it's better, sooner the better if you want to work abroad, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to go about it. Like I said, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't have a scholarship. So I fully understand that, financial aspects are important for many students, and that should be important. So, you can still work and go and still land a job in an international law firm, but just be prepared to know that this is probably the route you'll have to take. And there's nothing wrong with that route. It's a personal preference that somebody may not be happy with it. But yeah.
Makes sense. So while we are on the topic of financial help, how you were awarded the Hans Wilsdorf Scholarship, which is a very great thing. Could you share how you secured this and what, of course, it had a great impact on your journey, but how did you secure this particular scholarship?
Right. So again, I applied it as part of my admission to the MIDS. So that was a needs and merits-based scholarship, as I understood. Some universities, it's only needs-based. Some universities, it's only merit-based. This was both merit and need-based, as I understand. But yeah, essentially, you had to explain why you wanted the scholarship in a very short and succinct way, which, I said what the truth was. Look, I really like the program. I want to do it. I like arbitration, but there's no way I can do it without the scholarship. And it's not enough to just say that. I did tell them, look, I did have a loan to study when I was studying in Jodhpur. I don't think I can, but even I don't want to take another loan when this is still, hanging over my head. My father's working, but we're not from like a very rich family where you can just spend around that kind of money in a year. And I don't want to have that burden on my family either. So, I'm very much interested to do this, but unfortunately, if, without a scholarship, I can't do it. And you have to show that you've tried other means. I've looked into what scholarships the government of India can offer. There weren't many, of course. I looked into whether the Swiss government can offer scholarships. I realized that they used to offer LLM student scholarship, but from that year, they only made it for PhD students. So, so I guess the idea was you explain why you need it or the necessity as to why you need this, but at the same time show you have or you are exploring all options possible for that. And I guess it was a combination of those two things that helped me.
That's amazing. So the LLM application in specific requires balancing, timelines for applications, recommendations, SOPs, and language proficiency tests. Since it has been quite a long time since you went to your LLM, do you remember how did you manage these timelines effectively? With regards to statement of purpose specifically, how did you approach writing it?
So the statement of purpose is a story at the end of the day. I really don't know how I started on it, but again, I had a very good friend, Pratnya. She was also applying to many LLMs. She gave me a lot of advice because she had a lot more planning on in all of this than me. But yeah, I remember I did ask people who did LLMs in the previous years, not from our college specifically. So some of them were kind enough to send me their SOP so I get an idea of what it should look like. And then honestly, I don't realize how I got this realization, but I did understand, it's a story that you have to tell. And sometimes the university website itself gives you some guidance as to how to go about it. For example, the MIDS said your SOP should show a genuine interest in the field of arbitration or international law. Now, the rest is on you, and that's what you do as a lawyer. Get the facts and then you get the solution out of it. So that's what I did. I think I thought what my story was. And when you write an SOP, it shouldn't be a reproduction of the things or an expansion of your CV. That's not what an SOP is. You have your CV for that, which you are submitting as part of the application. The CV shows what you have done. The SOP should say why you did. At least that was my approach to it. And it also showcases your writing skills. It needs to read like a story. You can't just say, oh, I'm interested in this. I did this because I'm interested in this. No, yes, but no, that's not enough. And that's when I realized that, I started with the story of how, I did have an inclination towards ADR when I first heard about the topic. And then, of course, over time, there was more of a focus on arbitration through my internships. And one thing that really helped me there is I wrote 2 articles at the time, one on this topic of trade law and one on the topic of arbitration, which were both published in Kluwer journals. And that was a great segue for me to show that, hey, I'm not just saying I'm interested in it, I've actually done stuff to show my interest in it. And if it's published in a Kluwer peer-reviewed journal, it has some quality for sure. And if it has to have some quality, I did put in some work for it. And I would do that only if I'm interested in something. So, it was a combination of all those things that tells your story from the start to where you reach or why you apply. And then you shouldn't stop there. You should go on and say what you plan to do after this. So it's not enough that you get the information or the knowledge from that university. What do you plan to do after that? And, arbitration was upcoming or, it was becoming very popular at the time. All the, there were reforms happening every year, including in India. And that's what I said, I want to work in the field of arbitration. I want to contribute to the development of arbitration, both to the extent I can, both in India and abroad. And that's what I hope to attain or achieve by being in the university.
Right.
But yeah, there you go.
Right. So, and with recommendations, considering that you didn't have any work experience and you went directly after the undergrad, how did you decide whom to approach for the recommendations?
It was my professors.
Okay.
Because again, the recommendations has to be or should be given by people who have actually worked with you. Again, it's not, especially if you're applying for a foreign LLM, the name is not what matters. The content is what matters.
Right.
I had my arbitration professor, because I worked on IJAL, I've been working with him otherwise as well. So he gave me a good recommendation, Professor Yogesh Pai, again, because I had worked with him a lot on, he taught me all the trade law subjects, and he was instrumental in me writing my very first article on the subject of trade law. He was the one who told me about this topic, and I'm very grateful for that. That was my first proper article that I wrote, and he had a lot to do with that guidance. And I was comfortable enough to ask him for a recommendation because he's seen me work. And again, I got one from the Vice Chancellor at the time because, again, being part of all these committees meant I did work closely with him on many aspects, many issues. And that also showcases a different side to what I did. So, it's not just the academics or the interest, but, your general interest in organizing things, your general interest in managing things, which are, these soft skills are very important as well. So yeah, about the recommendations, I think it showcases, or it needs to showcase different things. So like I said, I had one from the arbitration professor showing my interest in arbitration, what I've been doing to hone that interest, the IJAL, or otherwise generally the Cartel Research Institute. Then, the vice chancellor, he wouldn't be talking about my academics because he's not someone who has taught me. There was one class he took, but that was it. But like I said, my interactions with him were very different as part of the moot court committee, as part of other issues that may come up in the college. So he was able to give a different perspective as to what I did at the university. And so at least that's what I focused on for my recommendations is, they give a holistic perspective of who I am and what I've done, as opposed to just getting something which is, oh, he's a great student. I don't think that's enough. However great you may be, I think it's all about a holistic view on you as a candidate. And that's what I did for my recommendations.
That's very true. And if we could talk about the MIDS program in specific, it's often considered quite unique as compared to traditional LLM programs. Could you share what aspects set it apart from others? Is it specialized modules or distinguished professors? What exactly makes it so different?
I mean, the subject is the same everywhere, like the way you teach it, of course, makes a difference. But at the end of the day, arbitration is what it is. And, there are things that you learn. It's, there is a set structure, I think. I think what made MIDS different for me, at least, is the fact that the faculty was excellent. The course structure was such that we had 2 general courses, so those would be semester long. Then there are optional courses. Again, you need to pick at least 2, but you can pick as many as you want. And you even had the option to attend classes but not give the exam. So you'd just be, I'm forgetting the term that they use for that now, which is bad because I should know that term. Anyways, it's something you do out of interest. So, you're just attending classes and in the end, you don't have to give the exam. So there was that option. And then there were things called intensive courses, which are like 2 or 3 day courses, again, by renowned figures in the field. You had Jan Paulsen, you had Bridget Stern, people like that who are arbitrators or who are people at the top of the arbitration field coming and taking these courses. So that was one thing I think that set it apart. The other thing is it wasn't just classroom studies. They understood and they emphasized on the importance of networking. So, we would have workshops where law firm partners would come and train us in the art of witness examination, on legal writing, working with experts, very practical things. We have to go for conferences. There are 2 conferences that every mid students would go, and, you can pick your conferences out of a list. So, and that's, for me, that was instrumental in getting my offer in White & Case because I met a partner in one of the conferences. But yes, they give you that opportunity to network. You had retreat, as they call it, which is a moot court competition kind of thing, but in a nice resort where they invite a lot of law firm partners as judges, and then they take you to the ICC or site visits. They take you to the ICC in Paris. They take you to the ICJ in The Hague. So, there was a lot of these, again, a holistic development of your skills or experience on international law that allowed you or gave you the opportunity to network a lot. So I think all those factors made a lot of difference for me personally.
That sounds like an amazing program. I mean, I could see how it would play such an instrumental role in someone's journey. So could you share some insights into your experience working as a research assistant to Dr. Michael and Professor Joost? How did it complement your academic learning at MIDS?
Right. So Professor Paulin, again, I took his course. There was something called the Trade Lab, where basically you're actually working for real clients. Again, that was something you had to be selected for, and thankfully I did get it. So 2 mid students would get selected for it, and I was luckily one of the people who did get selected for it. But that gave me the opportunity to work with Professor Paulin closely, and then I took another course of his the next year as well. But like I said, I still had some trade law inclinations, and I used to have discussions with him now and then, and I kept in touch with him even after my towards the end of my course. And that's when I honestly don't remember if it was him or the international law department that told me that he was looking for a research assistant. I don't remember how exactly I got to know of that opportunity, but then I went and spoke to him. I applied for it, and I got that opportunity. Now the good thing was I had some time. So how the MIDS works was you have classes until May, if I remember correctly, May or June. And then you have 1.5 months or so to write your thesis. The one good thing I did in MIDS was I started thinking of my thesis early on, so much so that by that period in May, I had finished my thesis. So I had 1.5 months left. And, I was not planning to come to India because I wanted to stay in Geneva. And then that's when this happened. So this was something I could give my all. So that's when I reached out to Professor Paulin, and he was more than happy to include me in the project. It was basically helping him write an article, which, by the way, is a great article that talks about WTO panelists and investment arbitrators, how these are two very different worlds. Even the title is catchy. I think it's WTO panelists are from Venus and investment arbitrators are from Mars. But yeah, so that was great. And Professor Weibel, again, that came through a contact. I had a very good friend, Deepak Raju, who studied in Cambridge, and he knew Professor Weibel well. And he was the one who told me about the fact that Professor Weibel was looking for a research assistant. So I wrote to him. And again, the other thing is, these were, at least the one with Professor Weibel, was a paid position. So I thought, it's something that helps me gain experience and at the same time earn something as well the time that I'm there. So that's how I got that as well. And yeah, it was a great experience, working with these academicians, getting to know how they think, because, it's not that they send you an email and can you research on that. No, they actually discuss it with you. They discuss what they're planning to do. They discuss what support they expect from you. And, that was great. I think that was amazing. And I really enjoyed it.
That does sound
that.
like
Yeah.
it does sound like great experiences. So now we've completed the LLM journey. Let's talk about, with the rising costs, like you've mentioned, it's quite expensive living abroad. Securing a job, especially for Indians after an LLM, does become a difficult, it's a major concern for many. So my question here is, considering that you secured and worked as an intern with some of the top international firms, how does one pivot from being a student to securing a job post an LLM?
Like I said, the usual route is you do internships. Now, well, I guess if you want to take it step by step, the first step is getting an internship. There is no formula for it. Like I said, you apply, you network, and I honestly don't have a very clear path that I can give anyone for that. In my case, what happened was, well, so I first did a LLB internship, and that's because LLB had publicized that opportunity with the MIDS group, and it made sense. It was a law firm in Geneva. We were students there. There was no work permit issues because as students you're allowed to work part-time. So I guess it was, they did interview a lot of people and they picked 3 of us. And again, I at the time had a friend who was working as a contractor attorney in the LLB office, so she gave me, she told me about what the team is like, what I should focus on in my interview, which was very helpful because she already had, I've been working there for a year, so she knew how the team worked. Then for White and Case, it was, again, a lot of right place at the right time. Like I said, I went for a conference where one of the partners from White and Case, with whom, he's like a mentor to me now. I'm in touch with him even now. He came as a speaker, and again, he was a last minute. So somebody couldn't make it the last minute, so he came instead. He spoke about a topic that was remotely related to my thesis. So during the networking drinks, we had a very nice chat about the topic, and he was very welcoming of that topic. I kept in touch with him. He put me in touch with another partner in White and Case New York who had written on a very similar topic. And, I made it a point to have a coffee with him when I went to Paris as part of my MIDS trip, the ICC trip. Once I finished my thesis, I sent a copy. I got it published in Clover, and I sent a copy of it to him. He was very happy with that. And, he asked me, what are you doing? I said, applied for internships. And he said, okay, let's see. So he asked me to send him my CV. And then I got an interview call. Again, the networking only helps you until the stage you get an interview. The rest is up to you on how you do your interview. I thought I did well in my interview, but it was a no at first. I didn't know the reasons then. But then the course was still going on. And what happened was we had this witness prep workshop in MIDS after that. And the person who interviewed me from White and Case was one of the people who came to take that workshop, and she was in my group. And, maybe she liked something I did during that workshop, but we had a nice conversation after that. And that's when she told me at the time they couldn't hire me because they needed a Georgian speaker. And then I told her, well, if that is the only reason, then look, I haven't leave internship, but I'm more than happy to come to White and Case after that if that opportunity is there. And they were very happy to do that for me. And the reason I said that is you need to talk. Now, and you have to be very careful about it. It's not a good thing to just go. You need to network in the right way. You shouldn't just go to someone and say, give me a job or anything that points to that direction. You need to develop a relation with them. You need to discuss, show what you're interested in. That's how you network. Your networking should not be with the sole intention of getting a job or getting an offer. That's not good networking, if you ask me. Your networking should be that term in what it truly means, networking, building relations, making contacts. And that's something, even when you're working in a law firm, that's what you do with clients. You don't go to a client and say, no, give us your work. No, go to a client and understand, build a relation so that when the time, or if and when the time comes, you have someone with that relation with whom you can speak to or ask guidance. So, again, I can't tell anyone how exactly to do it, but one thing I can tell you not to do is make it very obvious that the only reason you're speaking to someone is because you want to have a job or you want to have an internship, because it doesn't work. It just does not work.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of building connections, I think that's the best way to network with someone, because I'm sure the other person can also understand that you're looking for opportunities. I mean, they were probably in your position at one point. So I think building connections and showing your true interest towards something is what would motivate them to choose you in the future for some opportunities.
Absolutely. And then the other side of that, like I said, is you shouldn't hold back where you should,
Right.
you need to speak up where you do have to speak up, because, I could have been very well be shy and at that time not mention to that person, look, when she told me that this was the reason, at first I thought, okay, maybe I'll just leave it. But then I thought, what's the harm? Because, we had already had a good conversation. She's already interviewed me. She's seen my CV. So it's not like I'm out of the blue. So that was a calculated risk, if you want to call it that. But I asked her that, well, if that is the only reason, and then again, I segued into the fact that I've already gotten an offer from a very good law firm to do an internship, but I'm more than happy to come and, because I'm very interested in White and Case, it would be an honor to come there. And yeah, I mean, if I hadn't asked that, probably my life would have taken a very different way turn at that point.
It's a mix of, playing smart, but at the same time showing the curiosity and the need to achieve something. I think that's what, gives the best picture to a recruiter or anyone that you're trying to network it. And the fact that you went beyond to, reach out to this person and still connect with them despite not facing the best, reaction from them in the very beginning, the rejection. I think that's definitely something that people should learn about and focus upon, that, rejection is just redirection and you should still
absolutely.
Despite
You
everything.
should always be prepared for rejection. I was rejected by many law firms before I got LLB or White and Case, and even after.
Wow.
During my internship, I was still applying for jobs. I used to get rejections.
I mean, the biggest thing is getting up despite after, 7
Oh,
years.
absolutely.
That's the best thing.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing. So you spent 7.5 years at White and Case in Paris. What was your experience like? And then shifting to A&O Shearman in Dubai, what was the shift like between the two?
So White and Case Paris was, I owe all my professional, whatever skills I had to that firm or that office particularly. I had an excellent experience. Now, Paris, as you can imagine, is a place where everyone speaks French. It is a bit difficult to live in Paris without knowing the language. Despite that, I spent as long as I did there just because of the team, the quality of the work and the team that I worked in. And personally, I think that's something very important, that you need to be in a team that is great to or good to work with. I was lucky enough to get that on my first try in White and Case. They had a diverse set of work set because the arbitration team had 9 partners. Now, the good thing about White and Case was each partner had their own, they were all names on their own. So there are some firms where there are a couple of partners who are very, very well regarded in the industry. And then, not to say that the other partners are equally well regarded, but it's just there are some names that stand out more than the others. Whereas here, I thought everyone was great, and you work with different people, you have excellent work culture, the way in which you work. Everyone works differently, right? And the more people you work with, you understand how. And it's not a vertical team system like in many Indian law firms. Each partner, has his own team for a case. So I got to work with 8 different partners over the time I was in White & Case, not just in Paris, but again, being a global law firm, I worked with partners in Geneva, in London, in Washington. So that was a great experience, I thought. And yeah, like I said, the work culture was amazing. I had an excellent work-life balance. I could come home at least twice a year, which is great. Being in Europe, you can go for vacations on long weekends. But at the same time, when there's work, there's work. When there's a submission, when there's a hearing, it's not an easy life in a law firm as everyone might expect. And that's fine. It's not just all play or it's not just all work. It's a mix of both. And that's where I thought White & Case was great for me personally. The only reason I moved out of White & Case was, a lot of personal reasons. I needed to be close to India, and I thought Dubai made a lot of sense. And the other reason, of course, was I did a lot of construction law in White & Case, along with investment treaty work, but again, a lot of construction law. And I thought at some point I did see the trend that investment law may not be, or, it's going to decline, or at least it may change form with everything that was happening, whereas construction law is the one that I personally still think that is going to expand a lot more, just because you're always going to have construction.
Yeah.
And if you have construction, you're bound to have disputes. And the Middle East is a great place to do that. That's where all the investment is coming in. There are a lot of projects going on, which, in due course, it's very likely that a lot of disputes might arise. So all in all, I thought it's a great place to be. The proximity to India, again, to build a profile, I'd like to do something that is related to India as well. And I thought the proximity to India would help a lot being in Dubai. So yeah, there you go. That's
Great.
what led me here.
So A&O Shearman is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a Magic Circle firm back in the UK.
So A&O was the Magic Circle firm, and of course they recently merged with Sherman and Sterling.
Right.
So now it's no longer, it's a different entity altogether. It's, as we call it, it is a truly international firm now.
Oh.
But yes, the base or my legacy firm, so to say, when I joined the firm, it was still A&O, which is a Magic Circle firm in the UK.
Right. So how did you secure this particular opportunity, and how was your transition like from Paris to Dubai? How was the change in location, the work environment?
So to get, after a point, the best way to move is through recruiters, I think, unless you have direct contacts in the region. Now, I unfortunately did not have many direct contacts in Dubai. So I had gone through a recruiter because they have a pulse of the market. And, at a senior level, if you're a lateral hire, I think recruiters are the way to go about it. The transition was very easy for me because Dubai was not a new place for me. I used to come here quite often. In fact, I used to work out of the White & Case Dubai office now and then. They offer that flexibility. I'd still be working for Paris, but sitting in Dubai. So, again, that's a good thing about being in a global law firm that is open to cross-office collaboration, which White & Case was. So, I already knew, in fact, that's the other reason that I knew Dubai was the place I wanted to be. And I have a lot of friends here, a lot of school friends here, some family here. Home is 3 hours away. And, it was a seamless transition, if you ask me, from a personal standpoint. And from a professional standpoint, what I did was not, it was different in some sense that there are regional peculiarities that you learn on the job.
Yeah.
So that's something I have now picked up a bit of it, at least I have to say, after 1 year. But yes, so that was a big difference. But at the end of the day, what you did was the same. If you're doing, I did construction arbitration there, I was doing construction disputes here. Although the only difference here was you do a more holistic approach to construction disputes. So it could be dispute avoidance. It's not necessarily that you come in at the stage when there is actually a dispute, but you help the clients avoid disputes, which is a preference for many clients in this region. Understandably so, because that's the best outcome for all parties involved.
Right. So as we reach our last few questions, transitioning from India to a global legal market, it's definitely a dream for many. It's one of my major dreams as well, but I'm sure it comes with challenges. What were your biggest hurdles and how do you overcome them? And also one additional question here, do you think you would ever want to move back to India and work professionally from there in the Indian market?
Right. So India, again, I've not actually worked in arbitration in India. I've been involved with arbitration events in India, and I keep tabs on what's happening in India, but I've not actually worked in India. I have worked on Indian cases, of course, but I'm not gone to courts and seen what the arbitration how arbitration cases are being handled there yet. But that said, there's a lot of interest in India from what I've seen. There's a lot of investments coming into India, and India itself is doing a lot okay, I know that is debatable, but I personally think that India is doing a lot of things to showcase its trust in arbitration. You have so many of these institutions coming up. The government is supporting them. Of course, you have decisions now and then that may make some people question, okay, is it really arbitration friendly? But there are ups and downs for sure. But I don't think it's conclusive point one or conclusive aspect one way or another just yet. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential in India, and especially its proximity to the Middle East, to the other Asian countries. I think all of that, I feel that in the coming years, there's going to be a lot of movement in arbitration in India, a lot of developments in arbitration in India.
Right.
And with that in mind, while I do not have any concrete plans now, I would be open to the idea, because at the end of the day, I am an Indian lawyer. I do like, I've worked abroad, and it's a different style working abroad. But if the right opportunity comes, that is something I'll definitely consider, not immediately, but in due course. I think that's something I'd definitely be interested in considering, depending on how things evolve.
That's great to know. So, working across different jurisdictions, India, Paris, Geneva, Dubai, it has exposed you to various legal systems and cultures. What has been your favorite city to live in and work in with regards to the work environment and everything, and why?
Well, work environment, I already told you, Paris was the office. In terms of the office, Paris was the best place, I thought. But as a city, I think I would prefer Dubai to live in. Again, that's a very personal preference, because it's very close to home. It's where everything is happening now. It's a very convenient city to live in. So yeah, all in all, as a location, I think so far Dubai is probably the best place that I can say that I've lived.
That's amazing. So, looking back on your career, are there any decisions you would approach differently, or do you feel each choice contributed uniquely to where you are today?
I think there aren't many things that I would want to change, or I don't even know, how that would go. So I'm happy with the way things turned out. The only thing I would advise people is, if you're in an international law firm and if you plan to move, especially if you plan to move locations, and that's something, again, I was very comfortable in White and Gay, so I never really even explored the possibility, okay, I might want to move to be closer to home later on. But if that is, and I don't mean you have to think about it in your first year in a law firm, but and you're in your second, third year, give it a thought. Just because in general, it's always easier to move when you're a mid-level associate, especially if you're moving jurisdictions. At a senior level, you can still move, but it's a lot about timing, because if you're being hired to a senior level, they need to have a space for that. Whereas if you're a mid-level associate, that's something firms are more open to do, even if there's no active space for that associate. So that's one thing I would suggest. And again, having that said, I wouldn't have considered a move from Paris earlier, also just because I had excellent cases. But that was an exceptional situation, I have to say. In general, if I was planning to move to Dubai, probably if I had thought about it at least 1 or 2 years earlier, I think it would have been better. Because again, once you move to a new firm, then you still have to develop that network within that firm. You have to develop the rapport with the people. So it's all easier if you're a mid-level associate. So if there's anything at all, again, I'm not entirely sure I'd still do it, but if there's anything at all, it's probably that I would have wanted to consider the move to Dubai 1 or 2 years earlier than I did.
Makes sense. All right. So, our last question, what message or advice would you like to share with our listeners who are considering a career in law or in arbitration particularly?
I think my main advice would be, just make sure that this is something you're interested in. Don't do arbitration because it's popular. Don't do arbitration because other people are doing it. Don't do arbitration because you want to work, just because you want to work abroad. I think at a basic level, you need to have an interest for it, because only with that interest would you actually genuinely do things that would later take you up in your career. Like I said, I wrote an article out of my interest for it, which was a great thing for me in all my interviews with these law firms, because they see that I've written an article, and I try to steer the interview towards that article because I know I can speak about the topic. So, and I didn't write that article thinking 3 years from now I'd use it in an interview with a law firm, because I had no idea what I was going to do with that. But I did it out of my interest. So I guess my main thing would be, follow your interest. Do a trial and error if you have to. That's what law school is for. Even after your law school, if you really want to try, in your early years, you still have that flexibility to decide. Because I know people who worked on corporate law, then who came from arbitration disputes masters, and now are working in arbitration. That's absolutely fine. Everyone has their own journey. I'm not saying one is right or the other is wrong, for sure. But just follow your interest. Don't be stuck in a place that you don't like.
Right.
And if you want to explore something, do it sooner rather than later. I would say, don't keep it for later.
That brings us to the end of this episode. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you from our side for sharing such valuable insights and experiences. It was quite enlightening talking to you.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here, and I'm glad that you're doing this. Like I said, when I was a student, it would have been very helpful to get some guidance on LLMs and what happens after LLMs. So I'm very glad that you're doing this, and I hope that this is helpful for the students as well.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found today's discussion as enlightening as I did. Thank you.